Check 1 2 1 2. Let's try to adjust this. Get ready. Make sure the light's okay. See, it's coming in a little hot, a little bright, like last time. Thought we had this resolved. Get it like this. I mean, this works as well. Good evening. Happy Tuesday. We just got off of a excellent week of fights. Let me know if you are hearing me okay. M to the A to the W. Hello. Good evening. I'm actually also curious where you guys are from. I mean, because sometimes and it hit me when I was putting the word out on the live stream, 6 o'clock p.m. But it's like 6 o'clock p.m. to who, you know? And so boxing is super international, and I definitely want to, James, what is going on? Long time. Oh man, hope everything is well with you. Wonderful weekend of boxing though. I would say surprising, but not altogether shocking. Chicago, Chi-Town. One of my favorite rappers, Common, from Chi-Town, and I was down with Common back in the Resurrection and all One Day It'll All Make Sense albums. I think those were like 94, 97. Northern Territory, Australia, 10:30 a.m. over there. Good morning. Fernando, my man, what's going on? Yeah, good evening to you guys. Good morning to some of you. But yeah, I want to, jump right into it. I mean, actually, I'm saying that it's just 6 o'clock, so I'll give maybe another couple of minutes for for a few people to come through. But I definitely want to cover a few things. I want to talk a little, obviously, Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol and the aftermath of that, and just how Canelo losing a fight kind of shakes up the boxing economy, doesn't it? It sort of changes a lot of people's plans. Like, I don't know what Triple G Gennady Golovkin plans to do right now, but I'm sure that whatever he plans to do is hinging on what Canelo wants to do. So, yeah, when Canelo loses, it's kind of a tectonic shift in boxing. So we're going to definitely see how, once the dust settles, who's going to choose, what Canelo is going to choose to do. Is he going to try to get right back in there with Dimitri Bivol? If he does, is it going to be 175 or 168? Dimitri Bivol has expressed interest in coming down to challenge Canelo for his title. So the plot thickens, right? Because now you can't even, if you're Canelo, it's not just maybe we were in over our heads challenging a top tier in his prime 175-pound champion. But now if that champion offers to come down and challenge you in your stomping grounds, yeah, things are getting pretty interesting. I've also noticed a lot of, just overall hatred towards Canelo Alvarez in the wake of the loss. War Deity, what's going on? What's up? Thank you for joining. Oh man, yeah, good to hear from you guys. Good to see you guys. Canelo is mortal, and it's kind of surreal, right? You're used to seeing somebody on such a monumental win streak and just exceeding expectations almost every time they enter the ring as they're even climbing divisions. It's almost like when Manny Pacquiao got knocked out by Juan Manuel Marquez. Not quite that dramatic, of course, right? But and just before that, or a couple fights before that, was when Pacquiao lost the controversial decision to Bradley. But this one was just interesting because you were expecting to see some adjustments from Canelo. I did see some attempts at adjustments, but I just don't think he was, in this fight, able to get over the footwork disparity. It would be one thing if the big guy that's beating on you is like a plotter, somebody who just kind of marches forward or is somewhat heavy-footed. But when this guy has better legs and better movement than you, that creates a whole different dynamic. And it wasn't and we talked about this last week, it wasn't a Caleb Plant scenario where the guy might have better feet, but is kind of moving in a way where they're trying to box to earn points, but to try to avoid the bigger exchanges where you're letting, power punches go. I feel like Dimitri Bivol did a masterful job at really controlling distance. And anytime Canelo wanted to start demonstrating that he could assert control, Bivol would just hit him with like 3 or 4, jabs, and then just keep the jab hand out there probing, because his legs were good enough where if Canelo exploded on the aggressive, Dimitri Bivol would be out of range once again, or would at least have the guard up to where he's catching the punch high or low. It was an interesting dynamic. Jay Foreman, what's going on? Glad you could join. Yeah, the jab, the footwork, and the spacing, whether it's 175 or 168, is going to be a handful for Canelo to deal with. First of all, hey, Stan Tucker, Dad, a.k.a. Dad, what is up? Thank you for joining. Hey, Stan Tucker is my dad, but it was him, my brother, sometimes an uncle, my mom, just different family members on the couch watching, Riddick Bowe versus Evander Holyfield in the early 90s. And, these are some of my earliest, boxing memories. I remember some of the late 80s stuff, but very vaguely. Like, I remember Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvelous Marvin Hagler being a big deal. But, yeah, I would say over half of my boxing viewings have probably been with Stan Tucker in the house. And yeah, please believe before and after every fight, we're FaceTiming, discussing the action, and we both have very strong opinions. So one of these days I like to get them on a split screen perhaps, and get some more debate going, which I would also be open to doing with with some of you guys, and as we kind of continue to move forward. And as the fight calendar continues. And I know last week I was getting to a lot of the chats, but I haven't really found a workaround yet on getting my fat thumb on this screen to kind of scroll through what you guys are suggesting and commenting. Yeah, Pacquiao, yes, it reminded, I agree with that. Pacquiao versus Ugas, this was a similar dynamic, where by the middle rounds to the late rounds, you're realizing this isn't so much this isn't an indictment. It's not an indictment on the A-side fighter who we thought should win the fight. It's not an indictment on them. This is just a matter of physics and technical skills kind of combined, where the bigger guy in some regard is more well-skilled in certain facets of the game that really matter in that particular matchup. Not to say Ugas is a better boxer than Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao is an all-timer. But when you were watching that fight, not to mention Manny Pacquiao was 42 years old fighting Ugas, but by the middle rounds, you kind of felt you knew what time it was, where you see Manny Pacquiao looking more tired by the middle rounds, like we saw Canelo. His hair looked a little bit disheveled. Edward Espinosa, what's going on? Losing to a great champion erases what he has done by 31 years old. What? Yeah, it has not diminished or taken away from what Canelo has done up until this point. He did what he did at 168. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't see anybody else doing that to Callum Smith, walking him down. I didn't see anybody breaking Billy Joe Saunders' face. I mean, I saw Billy Joe Saunders boxing circles around most of his opponents. Caleb Plant, granted, he didn't have the strongest strength of schedule throughout his career, but no, we didn't see. Canelo straight up came in and took the 168-pound division by storm, and that can never be taken away from him. We saw Canelo start to breathe kind of heavy, and I know that the scorecards were all over the place. I'm sure I'm talking about with us. The judges didn't know what the hell they were talking about. To have that 4 rounds to 0 for Canelo after 4, basically Dimitri Bivol had to be as dominant as he was, as dominant as we all saw him perform, he had to be that good on that night to edge a win. 115, 113 on all three judges' scorecards. There's really no excuse for that. And you know, it was I forgot who had suggested it to me. It might have been my dad, who said basically the judges made the decision that, you know, you're gonna have to show me by the middle rounds that your output is actually effective. Otherwise, they basically weren't really counting Dimitri Bivol's jab as being an effective punch, which as the fight played out, we saw that it was effective. And Bivol was letting his hands go in the right moments as well. Just anytime it looked like Canelo was coming in to assert some control. And Canelo, by the way, was really throwing like one hard punch at a time, right? Just loading up on that right hand, loading up on the left hook to the body. Not to say that he hasn't done that in the past. I mean, he has been very economical in his movement and output. Dimitri Bivol just wasn't having any of it. And that's what we knew going in, that the volume from Bivol was going to be an issue, because he's not somebody who you could just casually outpoint. As much as the judges started to kind of swing, you know, rounds Canelo's way early, Dimitri Bivol's way of winning rounds is more convincing and demonstrative than, say, you know, a Caleb Plant or who's another fighter who, Devin Haney, in some ways, I think is a little bit too, I'll wait for you to throw a punch and then I'll make my mind up, moment by moment, to where you could, you know, you could give Jojo Diaz some of those rounds just because of the sheer volume and the optics of the fight. But yeah, we can't take away anything in terms of what Canelo's done. I think that all eyes are on Canelo, almost like what did Chris Rock say in that old stand-up, you know, so what you gonna do? You know, he like what? There's obviously the prideful part of Canelo that I'm sure wants to right that wrong. And as Canelo's looking at the scorecard, I'm sure that he is at least seeing, and also judging by his post-fight comments, basically suggesting that he thought he won the fight. It's going to be interesting to see how pride fits into the equation with the actual calculations that they're going to be doing, him and Eddie Reynoso, when they start looking at the film and just kind of talking about the fight. And, you know, there's about to be a WBA title eliminator, right? Zordo Ramirez this weekend is about to fight Dominic Bozell. The winner is supposedly, I mean, we know that these eliminators and guys who are holding the mandatory, sometimes they get kind of bottlenecked, and they are basically on a waiting period to see what that A side is going to do or what that champion's going to do. So I'm assuming that even if Zordo Ramirez, Gilberto Ramirez, beats Dominic Bozell this weekend, that it's not a foregone conclusion that he's going to be fighting for Bivol's WBA title anytime soon. And also, and I just brought this up, you know, just as we were starting, but I'm going to reintroduce it. Triple G, is this going to be a, yeah, that scorecard, the scorecards were bananas. Like, it was almost infuriating. Could you imagine if this fight resulted in a draw? Boxing came this close to embarrassing itself. Like, that was, if they said all three judges have it, 114, 114, my heart would have dropped. And it doesn't even have to do with who you're pulling for. You just want to see the right guy get rewarded based on the action that you're seeing take place in the ring. And that just would not have been justice. And instead of tipping our cap to Dimitri Bivol on a great fight, we would have all been just talking about the controversy for the next week, 2 weeks. And it would have been one of those landmark controversial decisions that start getting discussed for the years to come. Further, you know, hurting the reputation of boxing's integrity. And you know what? The fighters, unless, you know, you're testing positive for PEDs or something, the fighters are the ones who are exercising integrity because they're the ones laying it out on the line. So sometimes when you see a crappy scorecard get read and then you hear the cascade of boos, I just hope the fighters know that they are not being booed. The judges are being booed. The circumstances are being booed. But I in no way want to boo a fighter who's just basically just going out there and doing his job and giving it his all, regardless of whether he was on the favorable or non-favorable side of the scorecard. But yeah, I couldn't imagine if this read 114, 114. And all it would have taken was for one of those rounds from 5 to 12 to go the other way for Canelo. And if they were going to give those first 4 to Canelo, who the hell's to say that they wouldn't have tipped another one of those rounds Canelo's way? So, yeah, I'm just relieved, if anything, that the right person won this particular fight. But, yeah, if you're Triple G, who just had a difficult fight with Ryota Murata, who was all but certain that he was going to get a title shot in September, or not even a title shot. It's not even about the titles with Canelo versus Triple G. It's just about the trilogy. But when they announced Canelo's 2-fight schedule, when he decided to go with Eddie Hearn Matchroom instead of Al Heyman PBC and fighting Jermell Charlo and was it Benavidez for the second fight? Who was it for the second fight? Somebody here knows. I think it was Benavidez for the second fight. But when that was announced, people kind of discussed it like it was a foregone conclusion that, okay, Canelo's going to go in there, more or less handle business against Dimitri Bivol, and then move on. This is almost like a wake-up call or just a reality check where it's like, not so fast. Like, I know we saw Canelo just do what he did at 168, but 175 is not 168. And, like, let's give these other champions, some credit. These people are coming from all over the world, exercising like that they are the best at their craft. And we've seen Dimitri Bivol over the past few years. He's just one of those very, very, very good fighters who's just been floating under the radar because he hasn't had the high-profile fights that matter. Even if he's beaten, the Joe Smith Jr., Jean Pascal. I've been dying to see Dimitri Bivol in a fight that absolutely mattered. Because, I've wanted to, see him really get tested, like, I know, like, when I was thinking, oh, Jean Pascal, does he have a chance? Maybe, he's a pretty good, 1-2 shots at a time kind of guy. But no, Dimitri Bivol needed a showcase of this magnitude to thrust his name into the more casual boxing public. But yeah, so if you're Triple G, plans are pretty much on pause, right? Like, we know that he was already coming off of a huge layoff. So if you're Triple G, I doubt that you want to get right back into another extended period of absence. Because even, he's had longer layoffs even leading up to those couple of fights that he's had since the Canelo fight. The Steve Rolls fight, the Derevianchenko fight, and then way later the Murata fight. I think that he would want to stay at least a little busy. You don't want to come in, against Canelo after taking a year and some change off. So he just fought recently. I think that he's going to, whether it's against Canelo or not, just to keep that trilogy fight alive, or at least for his sake or for his chances of winning, book something else in late 2022. It doesn't have to be against somebody the caliber of Murata, but I don't think he's going to be fighting any of the people that we would like to see Triple G fight. We would love to see and tell me if I'm wrong, I would love to see Triple G fight Jaime Munguia. I just know that would be a high-octane, high-action fight. But I almost feel like it's not fair to even ask that of Triple G at this stage, given his age, given how we saw him struggle in the early rounds against Ryota Murata. I kind of think Jaime Munguia might win that fight at this stage against Triple G. But yeah, should Triple G, or do you think Triple G is going to wait for Canelo to come around? I don't know, but I didn't like his fight schedule leading up to the Murata fight, so nothing would surprise me with Triple G at this point. Yeah, there is a lot of money on the line for Triple G. I'm gonna get to a little bit of what you guys are commenting and asking. Charlo and Benavidez should call out Bivol. They're all calling out Bivol. The problem is, it's almost like Canelo's obviously the golden goose, which we all know. On the other side of that, and I mean the way other side of that, is like Demetrius Andrade, where it seems like nobody wants to fight Demetrius Andrade. And again, this isn't because Demetrius Andrade is just going to run the table and beat everybody, but it's a risk versus reward type of thing, to the point where even it's mandatory. Jaime Munguia, didn't want to take a fight with him. Just like Ryan Garcia didn't want to take the fight with Devin Haney as Devin Haney's mandatory. But I feel like the call-outs that would work right now, it would have to be within that same bubble of guys who aren't getting the fights that they want. What I mean by that is Triple G wants Canelo and nothing else. Jaime Munguia wants Triple G or maybe Canelo. Demetrius Andrade wants anybody who of a high name, high caliber name who's willing to fight him. And Canelo, at this point, he either wants to get back into the ring with Dimitri Bivol or he doesn't. But if he doesn't, he's got to come back to 168 and probably, fight a mandatory if he's going to be defending all of those 168-pound belts. It's just interesting because he was obviously on a rampage, and you know that he had plans to unify the 175-pound division. So he was going to, I have no doubt that after the Golovkin fight in September, if he were to have beaten Dimitri Bivol, he would then come around early 2023 if he had, he'd probably have that in-between fight at the end of 2022, his third fight on Matchroom against like a John Ryder. Basically a stay busy fight, even though, is John Ryder really that big of a stay busy fight? I mean, is he really that easy a stay busy fight? Who knows? He looked pretty good against Daniel Jacobs and against Callum Smith before that. But I have no doubt that Canelo would then make whatever needs to happen to have that title unification battle for undisputed against the winner of Joe Smith Jr. or Artur Beterbiev and Joe Smith Jr. But now everything is pretty much on hold. So yeah, like another thing, we talked a little bit about the hate for Canelo in the wake of this fight. A lot of people saying that he's overrated. Like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? Legacy-wise, do you still put him in the top 1 pound for pound? I kind of still have him there. He's hanging on there. He was running away with it. I still have him as number 1 pound for pound. And it's basically because he was just so greatly outsized in this particular match. Now, if Bivol comes down to 168 and beats Canelo, or if Canelo tries to fight Bivol again at 175 and loses again, I mean, you just can't stay number 1 with 2 consecutive losses. It's debatable whether you could stay number 1 pound for pound even coming off 1 loss, even if that 1 loss came a division up from where you probably had any business in. I think the organizations would let a rematch with Bivol at 168 for undisputed trump the mandatories. I agree. If Canelo was willing to accept that and Dimitri Bivol was willing to come down, I mean, because now you also have the commercial appeal of that fight, where that fight might be as big a fight as, and tell me if I'm totally wrong here, I think that fight, because Bivol won the first fight, is as big as Canelo versus Triple G3, because this guy just beat Canelo in Canelo's last fight. And now the narrative would play out that this guy's now marching to Canelo's weight class to take his belts, to come to his stomping grounds and to take it. So, yeah, that's a huge commercial bonanza, for lack of a better term, if they put that one together. If they do put it together, is it still Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol 2? Or do you have to flip that? No, I mean, it's Canelo defending his belt. So it's absolutely still Canelo versus Bivol. And it would probably still be Canelo versus Bivol anyway, because Canelo's that just that big of an A-side fighter, right? So we're gonna go a little bit more on the Canelo before we switch gears. Canelo versus Triple G, the trilogy fight should happen. Triple G is aged, but if they wait a little longer, it'll just be too late. Yeah, if they're gonna do the trilogy fight, it has to happen now. It has to happen now. I think Canelo realizes that. Maybe he waits on the Dimitri Bivol rematch and just handles the business against Triple G, because, yeah, if Triple G's, 41 years old? Look, I have my feelings about if Terrence Crawford is 35 or 36 by the time he fights Errol Spence. That totally flips my perception of that hopefully inevitable showdown. Yeah, I think that Triple G is too old now. You know, to be honest, I thought when they first made when they first made the first fight, I'm like, oh, great. Like, we're going to finally see, still prime Triple G against Canelo. In retrospect, I wonder if Triple G was about a year or two outside of his prime, I mean, he was off of that, basically that home run streak when he was knocking everybody out up until the fight against Daniel Jacobs, who was the first to take Triple G, the distance out of, dozens of opponents. It wasn't just outside of the window. I don't want to make an excuse for Triple G. It was a competitive fight. I thought Triple G, edged it, but I still wonder if Triple G was at his prime at, 36 years old? And then by the time the rematch came around, 37, 38. But yeah, if they're going to do the trilogy fight, that has to happen right now. Or else, you couldn't even really trust Triple G to beat the B+, A- level fighters. I'm going to ask you guys really quickly, who would you take right now between Triple G and Jaime Munguia? So, okay, Canelo rematch versus Bivol at super middleweight does 0 for Canelo. I agree, and that's why it's on Bivol and his team and whoever's going to be doing the propaganda to try to fuel that fight, that rematch, potentially at 168. They've got to paint the narrative that if Canelo doesn't take the fight with Dimitri Bivol, now he's ducking. And that's not even to say that I think that he's ducking. Dimitri Bivol is a bigger guy than Canelo. I know that he's been kind of billed as a smaller 175, but he's about 6 foot flat, almost 6'1", and we saw his. Look, the footwork was as problematic as nearly as problematic as the size. I see somebody saying Triple G still over Munguia. 2 people for Triple G. Interesting. Okay. Is that more is that more props and respect for Triple G and his skill set, or is that skepticism on Munguia if he's really in a difficult fight with somebody who could take his head off as well as him taking their head off? Because when we've seen him matched up, it's usually against a fighter who isn't the greatest of power punchers, but somebody who's usually like a game opponent. Kind of a win some lose some Gabe Rosado. Or Toriano Johnson. Jaime Munguia needs to fight somebody of high quality. Is it Jimmy Kelly? But yeah, I want to see Jaime Munguia fight somebody who's like a top 8 guy in the division. When he had beaten Saddam Ali in the way that he beat Saddam Ali, he was looking like an absolute monster. And then remember that one where Dennis Hogan should have gotten the decision over him, but he was he was given a gift decision in that one. He's actually improved a lot since that. He's improved with his volume. He's always been an accurate puncher, but I feel like he's got very good cardio. He takes a good punch. And I mean, when you mix volume with that type of power, it's different than David Benavidez, who does volume with the power because of the way that they're deploying their combinations. But similar way of overwhelming their opponents with the power plus the volume. But does a fight at 168 do 0 for Canelo rematching Dimitri Bivol there? I don't think it does nothing. We got another for Triple G. 2 more for Triple G. But I think that it does something in terms of the legacy. Even though it's not the same as going up at 175 and beating the guy there, but you just beat the guy that beat you for what it's worth, right? We know how bad he wanted to get Floyd Mayweather back in the ring for a rematch. He definitely wants to avenge this loss to Dimitri Bivol. And I think that he's got a better shot if they have it at 168 versus 175. So you might want to just hedge, let Dimitri Bivol come to your weight class, beat him there, and who knows, maybe go up there, go back to 175, but this time maybe fight the winner, Artur Beterbiev or Joe Smith Jr. I think that his chances might be better against one of those guys than Dimitri Bivol. Again, because of the legs, the movement, the footwork, the volume, and just the IQ. Dimitri Bivol, has always been a problem. We just finally saw that problem in the ring with an all-time 168-pound and 160-pound, fighter, especially 168. But do we want to keep going Canelo versus Bivol? I also want to talk some Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano too. We've got Jerome Boots Ennis versus Castillo Clayton. We also have some news. The WBC just issued the mandatory an eliminator between Ryan Garcia and Esau Cruz. That one excites me. Everybody thinks Gennady Golovkin over Jaime Munguia. I don't think. Oh, Edward Espinoza going Munguia. Says Munguia outlasts Triple G. That is possible. We definitely saw Triple G sucking a lot of wind in the early rounds, and there were certain fights where he was doing that. I remember way back in the day, he kind of had the same look, like exasperated look, where he's like, you could just see him taking that deep breath through his chest. Kasim Uma, he was kind of like that. Daniel Jacobs, he was a little bit like that. Obviously, Sergey Derevianchenko, he was like that. And Canelo, he was like that a lot, especially in that second fight. And then most recently against Murati, he was like that. It's a very human thing to do, but I didn't like Triple G's reaction to the body punches. So if Munguia, let's see, how much of a headhunter is Jaime Munguia? I feel like he's been mixing it up a little bit more, where he does go to the body a bit. He does headhunt, but if Jaime Munguia commits to the body against Triple G, he's got a really good chance, I think, of hurting and maybe, if not stopping him, beating him convincingly. That's hard to say, convincingly via decision. Triple G's jab is A+, but how would that jab fare if Munguia is pouring on the offense? I think it would still hold up. Damn, that would actually be a really good fight. It's too bad Triple G, probably with good reason, right? Doesn't want that fight. I get it. A few other things that we could cover today are Zurdo Ramirez against Dominique Bosel. Tony Yoka against Bacoli is going on this weekend. I know that a lot of these fights are like way less excitable than talking Canelo anything. Canelo Bivol, Canelo in hypothetical matchups. Jaime Munguia will eat something to unload the offense though. Good fight. Is that a PED suggestion? Switch of convo. Word up, MAW. Good looking out. Munguia seems to have a good chin, but kind of reminds me of a better version of Margarito. Okay, let's think about that. Margarito, I feel like it's like a tale of two Margaritos, right? There was the Margarito before the Shane Mosley fight, and then Margarito after the Shane Mosley fight. Remember the Margarito, was it him or was it Mayorga who stopped, rest in peace, Andrew Six Heads Lewis? You guys remember him? Kind of a sweet science guy. And then he, he was one of those guys who was kind of flirting with the top 10 pound for pound. And then he started to take a couple like knockout L's. It was either Margarito or Mayorga who had stopped him. Yeah, Margarito had a hell of a chin. That first fight between him and Miguel Cotto still doesn't sit well with me. That was I really feel bad for Miguel Cotto, and his legacy. And I remember how pro Cotto the HBO call with Jim Lampley and company was, because Miguel Cotto was a undefeated sensation, moving up from 140 where he held it down, and then 147. Was having a phenomenal career at that point, and then it was just a nightmare. The way that Margarito was walking through 5-punch combinations where Miguel Cotto looked like he was like landing like 60% of his power punches, but he would move to one side of the ring, throw some punches, move to the other side of the ring, throw some punches, and it just looked like Margarito had him on this like treadmill from hell, where you knew, even though you could score all 5 of those first rounds for Miguel Cotto, you knew that the writing was on the wall, and like, I don't think that this is going to go well and as this fight goes into the late rounds, unless Cotto somehow hurts Margarito. But yeah, Margarito, Munguia, I could see it. However, I think that Munguia has more, he's got more scintillating like firepower. When you see Jaime Munguia release his combinations, it looks it looks like, wow. It might be because of the reach, even though Margarito had reach too. I think maybe he had quicker hands than Margarito because he's throwing so violently. Like every time Munguia throws punches, I'm watching him against Rosado. Like, how the hell is Rosado still in? How is he still upright? How is he still managing to survive these rounds? Like every time, whether it's a 3-punch combination, 5-punch combination, Munguia has the ability to throw these fast combinations, although he's got the long arms and he's still fighting tall. He's not leaning over the pocket, even though sometimes when he starts getting into the phone booth, you'll start seeing him lean forward a bit. Jaime Munguia, I think that I underrated him after seeing him get outboxed by Dennis Hogan. You know, Toriano Johnson was outboxing him a bit too and was really taking it to him. But Munguia split Toriano Johnson's lip. One of the most gruesome, it's up there with like Badu Jack's vertical cut over the head against Marcus Brown. What Jaime Munguia did to Toriano Johnson's lip was almost criminal. I don't know how many stitches he needed for that, but like, as a fan, you're like, oh, damn, they're not going to stop it, right? And then you see the camera zooming on the cut, you're like, oh, yeah, stop it, stop it. But yeah, that's just when you have prodigious punching power like Jaime Munguia does, those are the type of results that you get. So yeah, I just want to see Jaime Munguia fight somebody very, very good. Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano too. Who are you guys taking? Right now, I think that I am going to see, watching the fight, I feel like I'm going to see, yeah, Munguia does have volume and he's coming into his prime. I agree, because he's still very young. Like some of these guys, it's surprising. I mean, you've got like Tony Yoka, right? The guy who controversially won the gold medal a few years ago. He's 30 years old, has only had 11 professional fights because he was just like in the Olympics in 2016, right? But some of these guys who turn pro super young, like Devin Haney. I remember watching Devin Haney's YouTube channel when he was like 16 years old. And he's like, yo, this is Devin Haney TV. I'm like, dude, who is this kid? He's like trained by Floyd Mayweather Sr., fighting, in Tijuana. I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever see this kid on the big stage, but he's getting after it. And again, he was younger than 18 years old. And now we see Devin Haney about to fight for all the belts out in Australia. Can't wait for that one against George Kambosos. I'm still not quite sure who George Kambosos is. I've seen the best of Kambosos, and that's a very good fighter. But damn, I can't wait for that one. But yeah, Jaime Munguia is still very, very young, so he's kind of growing into his greatness in terms of being able to put all the tools together. Where you've got the all of your innate natural ability, and then you're coupling that with the skills that you're developing and the experience that you're developing as you're fighting these different stylistic opponents. So yeah, it's going to be interesting watching him going forward. So let's see. I've got one for Castano. So Brian Castano, he's got the volume advantage, and Jermell Charlo has been too selective, in my opinion, in terms of his overall output. It works against certain guys, but it almost doesn't work in several fights, right? Like, it didn't work in the first fight with Tony Harrison. He saved himself in the Tony Harrison rematch by stopping Tony Harrison. But you guys remember, Tony Harrison was up on those scorecards, on the unofficial judges' scorecards, the official judges' scorecards. Jermell Charlo, he's got a good defensive construct, and he's picking off a lot of the punches. And when I rewatch the fights, I tend to judge it more favorably after a rewatch or two in favor, not that the fight was in favor, but I'm saying more rounds towards Jermell Charlo, because I'm seeing that he's actually picking a lot of the punches off. But it's just a lack of output, lack of activity. And you, in your own mind, might think that you're winning the fight because you could be thinking, hey, the ones that I'm landing are cleaner than what he's landing. When he's cornering me, he's only landing like 1 out of 6 of those punches. But you got to keep in mind that the judges are seeing what they're seeing. So if you're not giving them anything demonstrative to go by, like either shaking the guy up or at least kind of doing some sort of a flurry where you're following a power punch up or following a jab up with something on top of it, give the judges something to look at, because the judges don't have the benefit of the instant replay. They don't have the benefit of being able to see the fight, super multi-angled. I know that in certain jurisdictions, they'll have a screen to be able to go from watching the fight live to watching the screen, but I don't think they do that in Vegas. I don't think they do that in a lot of the places where most of the biggest fights happen. So you got one judge sitting outside of the ring, just looking at the same angle. So if the action's taking place on the other side of the ring, they're not even really seeing that. So you've got to do things to win favor with the judges, especially if you're not winning favor with the crowd, because the crowd's gonna, their mind is more or less gonna be made up going into it. So if Brian Castano is getting more of the crowd energy to where he's trapping you up against the ropes and then letting his hands go, you've got to do more than stick the jab out and then, move out of the way, letting him throw his 6 punches and you throw maybe the jab and one other and then reset. You've got to do more than that to win more of those rounds. I thought that Jermell Charlo was very, very lucky to get a decision draw in that one. I thought that it could have gone 2 ways. I thought it could have gone Castano 8-4 or 7-5, so a slight win for Castano, or it could have been a draw. But for it to have been a draw, you have to have given Jermell Charlo a lot of those swing rounds, because it's actually an interesting fight to rewatch, and you see a couple dynamics playing out. And I think that there's something about Jermell Charlo's style, even though he's knocking most of his opponents out, that still hasn't won favor in a lot of casual or even hardcore boxing fans. I think it's because we've seen so many close calls with him. We saw him, lose to Harrison and then come back and beat Harrison. We saw him losing to, John Jackson several years ago, where he saved it with a knockout, where he hit John Jackson. John Jackson turned around, turned his back to Jermell Charlo, was kind of pawing at his face, and then Jermell Charlo knocked him clean out over the ropes. These types of knockouts should actually win you a lot of fans, right? But whereas, and I said this in my Charlo versus Castano preview, he's not the best of round winners. We have the fighters who are very adept at winning the rounds, the Andrades, the Dimitri Bivols, Devin Haney, Canelo Alvarez. Well, Canelo gives certain rounds away, but it's a part of his strategy. He's, again, very economical, so he'll let you win a round with activity, knowing that you're not going to make it another few rounds without feeling the wrath of his power punches to the body and up top. But Jermell Charlo, unlike Jermall Charlo, isn't a great round winner. I actually think Jermall Charlo does more to win round over round over round than Jermell Charlo does. So, I could very easily see this rematch playing out where Jermell Charlo needs to pull another rabbit out of his hat in order to make up for the rounds that he lost and win the fight, either by stoppage or knocking Castano down once or twice. Elder Jean-Baptiste, long time. Oh man, glad that you're here. It's been a while, man. When I first started the boxing channel, my man was one of the first people who was engaging and commenting a lot. And glad to hear from you. Hope everything is well. I could see this being another scenario where, how do you have it? Who's gonna be the unofficial score judge? Is it gonna be Steve Farhood? How do you have it, Steve? Well, I've got it, 4 rounds to 2 after 6, or 5 rounds to 2, 4 rounds to 3 after 7, something like that, in favor of Brian Castano. I can see something like that play out. But I think that Jermell Charlo is such an electrifying puncher, and Brian Castano's offense, his strategy relies so much on him, being there. You don't have to go find him somewhere in the ring. He's coming at you, and he's coming at you in pretty sophisticated angles, and he's doing it, not behind a jab. Halfway into this first fight, he only threw a total of 6 jabs, through 6 rounds. But he's doing it through a straight right hand or level changes, different things, a lot of feinting. Boxing Wave, I actually agree with something that he had said about what Jermell Charlo needs to do to turn the tide in this rematch, and that is to do some more feinting. Jermell Charlo, it was almost like the offense did become a bit predictable, where he was doing that defensive construct and he would throw a jab, but the punches that he was throwing, they were on rhythm versus off rhythm. If you want to see off rhythm punching, watch Floyd Mayweather versus Ricky Hatton, perfect example. By the middle rounds, you see what off-rhythm punching looks like, and you see that Ricky Hatton, anytime he's clinching up, expecting a punch, the punch ain't gonna come. It's when you think, okay, I'm safe for a second. Oh, that's when the punch comes. Jermell Charlo, it's been a little too on rhythm, where if you feint and then throw, or feint and then feint, move, and then don't feint and just throw that time, you kind of mix up the punch count or the feint versus punch variation in a way where you could keep a Brian Castano guessing just a little bit more. I actually think that Landy Lara, in his fight with Brian Castano, did a better job of that. Now, he's also a southpaw, different dynamic, but he did a better job at keeping Brian Castano guessing than Jermell Charlo did. So Jermell Charlo is going to have to figure some things out. I think that the difference in this fight is going to be a knockdown or two for Jermell Charlo, where he's going to win a fight that might be a controversial decision win for Jermell Charlo, where maybe even majority of the people watching the fight think that they came away from the 12 rounds thinking that Brian Castano did enough to win 115, 113, 116, 112, something like that. Yes, this is a unification bout between Charlo versus Castano, as was their first fight. The first fight, like this fight, Castano's coming in with a with the is it the IBF or the WBO? I know some of y'all like, who the hell cares? But I think it's the WBO that Brian Castano won from Teixeira that he was bringing into the first fight, and he will also be bringing into this rematch against Jermell Charlo, who collected his titles. I know that he collected that the last two off of Jason Rosario, who had won those two off of Julian J. Rock Williams, who had won those two off of Jarrett Hurd. Everything kind of comes full circle, except for Jarrett Hurd. I don't know if we'll see him back in top form. Definitely not at 154, right? By the way, that was one fight that I wish had happened that didn't happen. Jermell Charlo versus prime Jarrett Hurd. He was a problem for a while, even though we did see Jarrett Hurd against Landy Lara. If you're looking for a excellent fight to rewatch, go watch or rewatch Jarrett Hurd versus Landy Lara. Phenomenal fight. But yeah, I'm going to edge Jermell Charlo via a close decision. I think he's going to have a lot of difficulty with Brian Castano in this rematch, and it would not surprise me if he does not have the answers for Brian Castano and if Castano wins via decision. I don't think Castano will stop Jermell Charlo. I would be surprised if Jermell, as hard as he punches, I'd be surprised if Jermell Charlo stops Brian Castano. Castano is just a he's just a handful, and he's more technical than he's given credit for. It's crazy that he's only like 5'7.5", 5'8", isn't it? At 154, and having the success that he's having, pretty impressive. By the way, when Castano was in the amateurs, his highest profile win was against Derevianchenko. That's kind of one of those amateur classics. You can pull it up on YouTube. But the win that most people today would be impressed with is the fact that he had beaten Errol Spence Jr. in the amateurs. Brian Castano did. Hey, thank you, James. Thank you very much for that. Yes, MAW Castano is a pressure fighter, absolutely. Okay, MAW, I think I might have missed one because I see that you said that's where Canelo went wrong with Bivol too. Was it, the round winning, the fact that he's so reliant or trusting in his power punching ability that he was willing to kind of give up some of the minute by minute within a round activity and then try to pour it on, come on strong, and then realize that when that's not going his way, it's like, oh, damn, I wish I had invested more into that minute by minute rather than looking to land the big splash. It was just interesting because when it does work for Canelo, it looks brilliant, right? Like when he's looking to load up on the big shot and he's not burning a lot of energy, it looks spectacular. It's when you get Canelo to have to work his butt off round over round over round, where you start seeing straight up, you start seeing him struggle. You start seeing him sweat earlier. You start seeing him, get very, very just like red and even bruised in the face. The bruising is one thing, but just the distress that you see that the fighter is under is usually when you try to keep Canelo on a treadmill, for lack of a better term. Yeah, I get what you're saying with that. But it's like, how do you rectify that? If the guy, can Canelo out jab Bivol? Let me ask that. Can Canelo see? And if he can't out jab Bivol, I don't know what you do to make up for the lack of volume. If the guy who's bigger than you is out jabbing you and is a better mover, you're almost. I mean, can you go to the body more? I kind of feel like Canelo, like he wasn't on the brink of getting stopped necessarily, but did you notice his legs weaken? Like, and tired and visibly fatigued to the point where when Bivol put his weight on Canelo, I know some people will drop to a knee strategically when the bigger guy or when just the guy is putting the weight on you. And then some fighters you'll see, and they'll even encourage you, drop to your knees, so you could show that this guy's putting weight on me. He's basically fouling me, and you get to preserve your legs by dropping to your knees. But Canelo's one of those guys who just has a little bit too much heart and pride to let somebody see him laying on his side like that. So when I saw Bivol start to put weight on Canelo, and then I saw Canelo do the drop to the knee and kind of lean over, I heard somebody scream. Did you guys hear the lady scream in the crowd when Canelo dropped to the knee and just kind of laid down for a second? It's just very uncharacteristic, and that told me his legs were not in great shape at that point. And that's why you also saw him start to, if they fought 10 times, Bivol would win. 10 is a lot. 10 is a lot. Look, I think that he would win 7 out of 10 against Canelo, I think. But yeah, I think I would favor Bivol in the rematch at 175. I'm not sure about who would win at 168 just yet. But when Canelo also relegated to laying on the ropes, inviting him in, that was another sign for me that, yeah, his legs aren't where they need to be against this stallion that he's fighting against, who, it was able to just hop in and out of range just brilliantly. So and then what did Dimitri Bivol do? In some parts, he would let his hands go when Canelo would rest against the ropes. He wouldn't overexert himself, but as Canelo was going towards the ropes, he would pour it on, get a big reaction from the crowd, a very excitedly concerned reaction from the crowd. And then what would he do? Stick that jab out there a few more times, and then he would kind of back up when Canelo's inviting him in. He would then back up and say, nah, you're going to have to use those legs, and we got to do this in the center of the ring again. So, yeah, I don't know what Canelo, off the top of my head, I don't know what he could do differently. I saw what Mike Tyson thinks he could do differently. He said he just wasn't jabbing enough. Well, the jab requires exertion too. And what happens if you start jabbing a lot and you're missing? There was a fighter recently that said that it was Oscar Valdez who said it's not, throwing the punches, and it's not, it's not the pace of the fight that fatigues you. It's missing the punches that you're throwing. That's what tires you out. So what if Canelo starts jabbing more and he's just hitting air? Not only is that discouraging, it's fatiguing, it's dangerous because it leaves you vulnerable. I mean, you don't think that if Canelo jabbed more that Dimitri Bivol would start seeking opportunities to throw a right hand on top of that? There's just a lot of things that could go wrong if you're out fishing, right? So if Canelo was going to jab more, he would have to pair that increase in jabs with better footwork, basically, or at least more active footwork to where you are doing more to get into punching range. But like, Canelo's not Sean Porter in that regard. He doesn't have the foot activity. He's got good footwork. He's got good technical footwork, and it works against the vast majority of opponents. It just doesn't work against this particular opponent. And we could, discuss maybe who else it wouldn't work against. I don't know if it would work against Jermall Charlo, who has pretty good legs. I would favor Canelo over Jermall Charlo, especially because they would probably be fighting at 168. I would have probably even slightly favored him back in the day when he was at 160. The two fights against Triple G changed a lot for me with Canelo's reputation in terms of how I would have viewed Canelo versus Jermall Charlo. Because I remember thinking about that a lot when they were both at 154. And when Canelo was fighting like Liam Smith and who else was he fighting there? Alfredo Angulo. I was really saying like, damn, I want him to I wanted to see him against, this up-and-comer at the time. Jermall Charlo was knocking out like Cornelius Canine Bundridge and people like that. I just wanted to see them go at it at 154. But yeah, this is going to start to make people think a lot more heavily in the matchups that Canelo finds himself in, because, movement, a lot of people thought that Canelo had this whole thing solved with the movement, with Erislandy Lara, because back in the day, Lara was a great mover. Not so much today. Now you could find him in the pocket a lot more, like the Cuban, the great Cuban, Guillermo Rigondeaux, used to move a lot more, used to be a lot more elusive. Now we see him in the pocket a lot more, throwing more power punches, getting hit a lot more, except for that fight against Casimero. Oh my God, did anybody? Yeah, but okay, I'm off on a tangent on that one. But movement is something that people thought were solved with the, after seeing him fight the likes of Caleb Plant, right? And they thought that the things that were plaguing him against like a Austin Trout or Erislandy Lara were accounted for. But now this fight with the bigger, granted, these other guys weren't that much bigger than him, against Dimitri Bivol will have us, rethink how these matchups are going to play out. But I'm very curious as to who Canelo wants to fight next and who they actually decide on fighting next. Because he might want to fight Bivol next, but they still choose to go the other way, because I think Canelo, and this has been reported, he obviously has a huge appreciation and respect for Eddie Reynoso's opinions. He made it sound like Eddie Reynoso, as much as him, is picking the next opponents. And he's basically saying, hey, what's up, TJ? Hey, glad you could make it, man. He's basically saying to Eddie, that I am more or less dancing to my man Eddie Reynoso's drum. I'm the soldier. He's the scientist who's basically looking at the matchups and thinking, okay, who do we want Canelo in next with? So I think that we might see a disparity here between who Canelo wants to fight and who they elect to fight next. Again, the money's on the table for Triple G3. It could, be a confidence booster, assuming Canelo beats Triple G, which I absolutely believe he will. I think he's actually going to stop Triple G in the third fight. Maybe. It's just hard to imagine something that we haven't seen, Until I saw Roy Jones get knocked out by Antonio Tarver in the rematch, I thought Roy Jones Jr. was invincible. Let's see. Yeah, if there was a weakness, throughout Canelo's history, if there was something to point at, it's footwork, and not even footwork necessarily from a technical standpoint, but just in terms of how it pairs against somebody with active feet and a mobile jab, right? A jab when you're on the move and able to stick it out. Damn, and couple that with the volume. Dimitri Bivol's just yeah. It should have been a sign for many, just the way Dimitri Bivol handled Joe Smith Jr., that he did get caught at the end of the 10th round and got rocked pretty badly, but otherwise he pretty clearly outboxed. Stephen Embry, good, heck yeah, glad you could make it. Canelo should stay away from 175, yeah. Well, here's the thing. Who would you favor between Canelo and Artur Beterbiev? Or Canelo and Joe Smith Jr.? I think I would favor Canelo against Joe Smith Jr., I think. Artur Beterbiev, less sure, but the age is a problem for me in Artur Beterbiev. Yeah, Bivol, it might just be a bad stylistic matchup. You know who else I think would give Canelo a tough fight is Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez. And that's whether they get it on at 168 or 175. I mean, styles make fights. Even though I didn't love how Zurdo looked in his last fight. I thought he was getting hit way too much by a guy who looked like he was just like very, very stationary and just throwing a lot of punches. Zurdo was getting hit a lot in that fight. But, Zurdo could take a punch, and if you could take a punch at 175, is it safe to say that you could take Canelo's punch well at 175? That's the question. Like, remember we just saw Dimitri Bivol fight Craig Richards, who, by the way, is about to fight Joshua Buatsi. That's another fight. That's a fight that's going to take place next weekend. Keep your eye on that one. It should be like on the zone. So if you're, it's going to take place in the UK, I believe, right? So Craig Richards looked pretty good in a few of those rounds against Dimitri Bivol. In fact, it was that fight mostly that had most people thinking, Dimitri Bivol, he's not that good. Or Dimitri Bivol, he's not as good as he was 2-3 years ago, because of how many rounds the 6'3" Craig Richards appeared to be winning against Dimitri Bivol. But again, 175, different can of worms, right? And I think that Craig Richards might end up being better than we might have given him credit for going into the fight against Dimitri Bivol. Because we got so used to seeing Dimitri Bivol, just look like he could just roll out of bed and dominate a fight. It wasn't so much the case against Craig Richards. He won the vast majority of the rounds, but Richards, won maybe 3 or 4, which in itself is unusual for a Dimitri Bivol fight. Hell, I don't know if Canelo won 3 or 4 rounds. I had it 9-3 when I first watched it. When I watched it again, 8-4. I do not understand a 7-5 scorecard. But I don't know entirely if Canelo Alvarez beats like Craig Richards. I think he does, but we have to see him fight another 175 guy in his prime or near prime to really be able to assess that. By the way, it was announced, that the WBC, and I mentioned this maybe 20 or so minutes ago, is ordering the Ryan Garcia versus Esau Cruz fight at 135. What do you guys think about that one? Stylistically, Esau Cruz looks like, I'm just saying profile-wise, right, with the lack of height, looks like somebody whose head Ryan Garcia will just take off, right? Because if you got to keep on jumping into the pocket, Ryan Garcia's got a couple things going for him. He's got power, he's got speed, and he's got timing. So almost like Teofimo Lopez has a scary counterpunch. Certain guys did, who else has just like a devastatingly scary, counterpunch? I recently saw, who recently was throwing hooks that had me thinking that, somebody fighting this weekend, Jerome Boots Ennis, scary left hook, or right hook if he's, fighting from that stance. Ryan Garcia could have problems if this fight goes into the middle rounds, but here's the thing. If the fight is going into the middle rounds, then I'm assuming that Esau Cruz isn't going to have the same legs that he had in the beginning of the fight, right? You start, getting a little bit fatigued by the 5th, 6th, 7th round. The fight starts slowing down, but there are a couple things to consider here. I feel like in a couple of Ryan Garcia's fights, including this last one that he was in against Emmanuel Tego, it looks like at a certain point, now Tego was running all over the place and wasn't really engaging after he felt the heat, right? But Garcia at a certain point looks like he's pretty upright with his chin out. And he looks like he's only looking for a couple of openings. Otherwise, he's not going to really let his hands go. Like, he'll throw a jab, he'll throw a 1-2, he'll even throw a 1-2-3, but he's not going to put that sauce on it, like that special timing, that slim opportunity. It's like a little window of opportunity, a milliseconds worth, where you have to throw the punch at that time and you unleash it, hoping for the best. We saw him knock out it was a journeyman that he fought on Valentine's Day in, I want to say, 2020. And that was his last fight before his fight with Luke Campbell. But if you're waiting for a perfect scenario against, Esau Cruz, well, Esau Cruz is going to present scenario after scenario after scenario, right? I just think that that's giving Ryan Garcia too many opportunities to take your head off. It's going to be interesting to see how easily, or not so easily, Esau Cruz can close the distance and actually let his hands go. Now, at this point, he looks super resilient. He went 12 rounds with Javonte Davis, although I do think that fight would have played out differently in the last 5 rounds if Javonte Davis didn't apparently, seemingly to me at least, really hurt his hand, his signature left hand, to the point where he did not throw that thing once over the course of like 3+ rounds. I'm watching the fight like he must have really devastated that hand, because these rounds are looking really close, and this scorecard is going to be very interesting if things keep on going in this direction. So Esau Cruz is looking durable. Javonte Davis wasn't able to hit him with certain punches that he's able to hit taller fighters with, because this was a different dynamic. He was throwing, straight across or even lower, because Javonte Davis is short, but he doesn't fight that short. He fights kind of short. He'll get some bend. But Esau Cruz has a lot of bend, right? He's coming in a few inches shorter than he really is, and then he's exploding high. It's just that we've seen Esau Cruz at least in his last couple fights, fight guys that were more or less at eye level. Yorikis Gamboa, Javonte Davis. So what's going to happen when he's got a 5'10 target, the height of Oscar De La Hoya? How is that short versus tall dynamic going to play with a guy who's relentlessly coming at you, but he's coming at a guy who's looking for you to expose yourself so he could knock your head into the upper deck? It's gonna be interesting to see how that one plays out, and especially if it gets out of the first few rounds, what story is gonna play out between those two. Yeah, his head is also a bit of a weapon. He comes. Yeah, you see that? He'll lower his head, and trying to think of who else. I think it was an MMA fight that I saw. The fighter who was taking incoming fire, they started, kind of dropping their head, just timing it to where the punch is coming down, and instead of landing flush somewhere up here, you're catching something over here. And during the fight, I thought that I saw Javonte Davis land something that just looked like, that looked like it was like literally like on the hardest part and the thickest part of the skull. That could not have felt good for Javonte Davis. And Esau Cruz, it's a smart thing to do. Does it a lot. I feel like a lot of fighters did that. I think Joe Frazier to an extent did that. The way that he would keep on dipping. If you're a short fighter fighting a guy who's looking to come down over the top, why not? It's better than doing this. So Ryan Garcia versus Esau Cruz. Really looking forward to that one. Yeah, I agree, TJ. I think Tank did hurt his hand. But Cruz was pushing the tempo. Yeah, he wasn't getting hurt. But look, I think he was getting stuck though. I think that Javonte Davis was starting to figure certain things out from a technical standpoint to where he started. The first couple rounds were interesting. Then I thought by 3, 4, 5, Javonte Davis seemed to have it more or less in more control than he did before. But you're right. Cruz keeps on coming at you. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens when if Cruz starts getting landed on flush by Ryan Garcia. Because, it's hard to picture anybody taking the Esau Cruz. Castillo Clayton, yes. I think okay, legit test for Boots Ennis, flashy versus fundamentals. With Castillo Clayton, who, I'm assuming that a lot of you know Jerron Boots Ennis. If you don't, he's pretty much like one of the, most of you guys know, he's one of the greatest or the most exciting looking young talents in the sport, pound for pound. Like prospect turned contender, pretty much turned contender sooner than most, right? Like he hasn't even been a pro for that long. He hasn't beaten any really good fighters. He's beaten Sergey Lipinets and Tomas Delorme. Both of those guys had their best days at 140. Yeah. Oh, William Zepeda, another one of those exciting prospects. Check him out. William Zepeda, is he going to be on the? And William Zepeda, by the way, is different than Jose Zepeda. Jose Zepeda is the one who fought the fight of the year with Ivan Baranchyk and who knocked Baranchyk out, also had a very close, razor-thin loss to Jose Ramirez. But this is William Zepeda, somebody who's just oh, man, you want to talk about a nightmare. So, Castillo Clayton, very technical fighter. He's a patient fighter. Here's the problem. He's looking for opportunities, and he's very measured, right? He's coming in, often throws the high guard up. And he's kind of probing, changing levels. He's doing all the things that boxing 101 you're taught to do to have maximum success. He doesn't have a talent that's jumping off the page. I would say he's like a B-C level athlete, selectively letting his hands go. I just don't see how that's going to win him a lot of rounds against Boots Ennis, because I think that he's going to give Ennis some problem early, but not early. I think Ennis is going to give him hell early, but I think Clayton is experienced enough to get out of that initial storm. So I don't think this is going to be a first round knockout. I don't think it's going to be a first, second, third round knockout. I think that by the second, third round, we might even get fooled into thinking, hey, is this about to be an interesting fight? and then you're going to start seeing some of the output diminish from Boots Ennis. You might see him get hit a couple times in some of these exchanges, but I think by the middle rounds, you're going to see. I think you're going to see more of Clayton unable to close the range against Ennis and kind of standing on the outside and start getting picked apart, where he's just receiving a volume of power punches to the point where somebody like either waves it off, jumps in, stops the fight, something like that. I could see that type of dynamic playing out where maybe he wins like a round or two, maybe, but gets finished by like I don't think it's gonna be super late, like 10th, 11th round. I think it's gonna be more like 8th, 9th round, something like that. I see how he can make the rounds close. I don't see how he can demonstratively win the rounds against Boots Ennis. He's a good fighter. It's going to be like a 1-2 inch height difference, but I also think that it's going to look like a greater height difference between the two. Even though it's only a 1 to 2 inches, because of how tall Boots Ennis fights and how high guard but crouched in a way and patient, slightly wider stance Castano Clayton fights. It's going to look like a 3-4 inch height advantage. Not to mention the reach. I think is going to look longer than the 2 inch reach advantage as well. I think that's what the optics are going to look like. Who do you need Boots to beat to know that he's got the goods? A realistic fight at this stage of his career. Well, okay, realistic as in. Okay, realistic meaning that it has to be like somebody in PBC, right? Because I want to say Virgil Ortiz Jr. That's my dream fight between great young contenders. Like, I don't know who I would pick between Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz. Virgil Ortiz, man, he's one of my favorite fighters right now, as is Boots Ennis. But Sean Porter, yeah. So Porter, I don't think Porter's gonna fight anybody anymore. But Danny Garcia. I know Danny Garcia says he wants to fight at 154. I've got to see it to believe it. You don't think they'll let Virgil near Boots? Oscar De La Hoya, it's funny because he treats his own fighters a little bit differently than he treated his own career. Oscar was down to fight anybody. Like, Oscar was fighting everybody that we wanted to see Oscar fight, he fought, I think. I might be forgetting somebody, but Oscar fought them all. But he handles his fighters in a more career management type of way. But let's get realistic about this. Stanionis. I want to see Boots Ennis against Stanionis. I think that would be a fight where, Stanionis is only like ranked 1-2 spots behind Boots Ennis. It's Boots Ennis is number 4, Virgil Ortiz is 5, Stanionis is 6 in the division, and then Keith Thurman is 7. And this is all according to Ring Magazine, which I view as more credible than any one of the sanctioning bodies. I usually hold them and their ranking system in higher esteem, except for their pound for pound could get a little wonky, but their divisional rankings. Jorana Ennis is 4, Virgil Ortiz is 5, Stanionis is 6, Keith Thurman is 7. If Conor Benn, well, they're bringing them. That's going to be interesting. We talked about that a little bit. Ugas. That would be good call, TJ. Ugas would also be an interesting one for Boots Ennis. Whew, that would be a really good test for Boots Ennis. Damn. I wouldn't feel too crazy favoring Ugas in that fight. I would want to see Ugas take another fight or two after this, beating at the hands of Errol Spence. But another fight or two under Ugas' belt. Now, keep in mind, Ugas is getting old too, right? He's already in his mid-30s, so the clock is ticking. But that would be another good one. Conor Benn. I want to see Conor Benn in a big fight just as much as I want to see Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz Jr. in a big fight. I would want to see Conor Benn against somebody who Virgil Ortiz has already beaten. I would want to see him fight like a Mean Machine Kavyaskis, somebody like that. Yeah, Algeria was a step-up fight. Chris Van Heerden wasn't really a step-up fight, especially after the inactivity. But, in a perfect world, you could get a Conor Benn versus Boots Ennis, but that ain't happening. I don't know what they're going to do with Conor Benn because of how shallow the 147 waters are over at PBC. Or not PBC, but Matchroom, DAZN. So Conor Benn is a payday. Eddie Hearn ain't letting them buy them. Yeah. Ben versus Broner. Yeah. Ben versus Broner works. I mean, I think Ben wins. I think a lot of people beat Adrian Broner right now. Did Kell Brook retire? I just saw MAW say Kell retired. If he did, I missed that. I know that they're kind of talking about potential opponents, and Kell Brook is kind of playing hardball with his handlers. He's basically trying to get top dollar, which I get it. So Kell is retired? Wow. Okay, I mean, that's not the worst decision in the world. Kell Brook is one of the guys who I always lament what happened to him in those back-to-back fights with Triple G and Errol Spence Jr. Talk about daring to be great, coming back and really, really costing you in that case. Like going up and fighting the monster that was Triple G. Kell Brook was one of my favorite fighters for a couple years. Basically leading up into his fight with Sean Porter, where I didn't know who I wanted to pull for between Porter and Brook. And then, in that 3 fights, again, he beat JoJo Dan and a couple other guys, defending his IBF title after winning it, and then fighting Triple G. That was just, I wanted to see Keith Thurman versus Kell Brook. That was my dream fight of that particular era in 147, because Errol Spence was still on the come up. Errol Spence was basically he was like the Boots Ennis, back then, where Boots Ennis is on the come up, where none of the guys who have the stature want to fight. No, I'm not fighting Errol Spence, this kid coming up. Hell no. But I would have wanted to see prime Keith Thurman versus prime Kell Brook. That would have been a great fight, in my opinion. I think that Butayev would be a good test for Boots Ennis or Virgil Ortiz Jr. Now, Virgil Ortiz Jr., we've got to be mindful that he's under Golden Boy DAZN, so it's slim pickings with his matchmaking as well. I don't know how they're going to handle that. Somebody had asked, is Kovalev fighting? Yeah, Kovalev is fighting. He's fighting Kubrat Pulev's brother or something, right? This is on the Triller undercard, and I have a music YouTube channel. I started it not too long ago, but they're having a versus, right? Versus where they do the rap battles and stuff. The rap battle side of it is Cypress Hill versus Onyx. I did a preview of that one on the Woog Talks Music channel. Sergey Kovalev is fighting Terrell Pulev, and then Kubrat Pulev. The guy who fought Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko. Which go back and watch Vladimir Klitschko versus Pulev. Pulev really hurt Klitschko in that first round with the jab. You saw Vladimir do that thing that he does when he gets hurt, where his shoulders go up and his arms go out. He was in all types of trouble from a jab. It was crazy. Yeah, Tervel Pulev. Yeah, thank you. On that now this weekend also. So there's that Triller card, right, with the Pulev fight. By the way, Kubrat Pulev is fighting Jerry Forrest. Did anybody see Zhang Zheli, who was supposed to be fighting, what's the other, Philip Hrgovic, was supposed to be fighting him on the Canelo Bivol undercard. Philip Hrgovic had to pull out of the fight, so Zhang Zheli fought a last-minute replacement, knocked him out. But Zhang Zheli fought to a draw just before that, or a couple fights before that, with Jerry Forrest. Jerry Forrest is about to fight. Okay, Jerry Forrest lost to Carlos Takam during the 2020 COVID when they started letting the fights, commence again with no crowd, right? So Carlos Takam beat Jerry Forrest, but Jerry Forrest has been fighting some very, very good and close fights since that. I want to say that he fought somebody else to a draw, another good fighter besides Zhang Zheli. Zhang Zheli knocked Jerry Forrest down 3 times in 3 rounds, and Jerry Forrest ended up fighting him to a draw. Think about that. Think about what happens to the scorecards if you get knocked down in the first round, second round, third round, and then you come back and fight to a draw in a 10-round fight. You got to get busy, right? Not a 12-rounder, 10-rounder. Jerry Forrest fought a draw with Michael Hunter, who's fought to a draw with Alexander Povetkin, whose only loss to this day is against Alexander Usyk down at cruiserweight. So Jerry Forrest is about to fight Kubrat Pulev. I think that Jerry Forrest, if he's at his best, is going to beat Kubrat Pulev this weekend. I haven't checked the odds on that one yet. Yeah, good call, TJ. Yeah, just fought Hunter also. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Jay Foreman, I agree with you. I admire Kell Brook a ton too for taking those tough fights, man. Like, I mean, do you remember, like, you could tell when a fighter is not quite as confident as they used to be. You could hear it. You could hear them in interviews. They start qualifying their statements. And I remember when Kell Brook kind of hit that point too. It was kind of disheartening to witness that. Stanionis beat Butaev in a very close fight. Well, it was judged close. I think it might have even been a split decision. But I thought that he should have won like 8 rounds to 4, or maybe even 9-3. 8 to 4, I guess, would be fair. But it was a very good fight. It was a fight where in the early rounds, I'm like, whoa, grab your popcorn. We don't know where the hell this ride is taking us, because Butaev is just hard as nails. Stanionis is hard as nails. And, that jab, I thought that jab was going to be the difference. And it turned out, just giving Butaev a lot of problems where he had to start trying to wing a bunch of combinations around the jab that he just kept on eating. Stanionis' jab is an absolute problem. Yeah, upset alert this weekend. Yeah, I think that Kubrat Pulev gets upset by Jerry Forrest. Again, I haven't seen the betting odds. So, TJ, were you referring to a particular upset? Because I haven't seen the betting odds, but the upset that I could think of off the top of my head would be Jerry Forrest over Kubrat Pulev. I don't think that Castillo Clayton is going to upset Jerome Boots Ennis. If Castano beats Jermell Charlo, that can't be considered an upset, right? That's like an even money fight. I don't think Bacoli beats Tony Yoka. Tony Yoka is 11-0. Has already beaten some pretty good, mid-tier journeyman style fighters, like Demetrenko. He's beaten Demetrenko and a couple others that are around that same tier. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, the odds swung. Okay, so now Charlo is a demonstrative favorite over Brian Castano. I wonder why last time I checked, I swear it was like minus 120 to minus 110 or something like that, where it was near even money. Very interesting that it swung that heavily. That swung to like 2-1, Jermell Charlo. That is interesting. On the UFC side, you've got Jan Blachowicz taking on Alexander Rakic. Blachowicz is a former light heavyweight champion. About to fight Rakic. That's going to be an interesting one. I don't think Zurdo Ramirez is going to be upset in his fight. By the way, we have about another 10, 15 minutes or something. If you guys want to talk UFC, we could go there too. We just had a hell of a UFC weekend too. But the following week, we've got Joshua Buatsi versus Craig Richards. We've got Janabek against Danny Dignam. We've got David Benavidez returning to the ring against David Lemieux. I think that one might be a little bit of fool's gold. Not that David Lemieux is super old. He's actually younger than we might have thought. Like, he's only like 33 years old. It just seems like he's been fighting forever. But David Lemieux is a 160 guy, right? At best. He's 160. He's a 5'8", 5'9", 160. So picture him against 6'2", 6'3", or whatever, 6'2", David Benavidez. I don't think it's going to go well for David Lemieux. I watched, and I'm looking forward to doing a preview on this one. He's fought lesser competition recently that had him wobbled, knocked down, and hurt early in fights. So I don't think that this 168 foray for David Lemieux is going to be a successful one. I do think that he's been slipping. I mean, he's kind of been a feast or famine type of guy. Like, I've seen him cleanly outboxed by Billy Joe Saunders. I've seen him just get brutalized over time by Gennady Golovkin. And I've seen him deliver some of the most, devastating knockouts I've ever seen, like the one against Curtis Stevens. And then later on in the month, we've got Javonte Tank Davis versus Raleigh Romero. Why'd they make that fight for Raleigh Romero? That same night, by the way, Erislandy Lara returns to the ring against Gary O'Sullivan, who's always a game opponent. Sometimes he gets knocked out early. Sometimes he gets knocked out late. Sometimes he'll give you a hell of a fight, and sometimes he'll win. But it's going to be interesting seeing this 40-year-old Erislandy Lara fighting up at 160. I don't like the sound of it, but I don't think it's going to be O'Sullivan to make Lara pay for that. He might make it more interesting than we think, but 40 years old is 40 years old, especially for a mover like Erislandy Lara. Now you're going up a division. Yeah, David Lemieux does have heavy hands. But yeah, he's right there. And David Benavidez, if you're not even a moving target, David Lemieux might mess around and hit you with a 10-punch combination or something. So he's gonna have to deal with this, a height discrepancy, and the fact that Benavidez, it has faster hands. He's got the volume, and he for somebody who's like that aggressive, he's actually not that bad defensively. David Benavidez, he's able to pull away pretty nicely. He doesn't take the greatest defensive angles. Like he can get hit, but it's gonna take David Lemieux has nothing more than a puncher's chance. Like I don't think he has any real round winning ability after the first round or two in this fight. I think he might, because he's not a terrible boxer, but once the fight starts, getting into its flow, I think that it's going to be, largely one-way traffic, and it's going to be David Lemieux patiently and then maybe impatiently looking for his opportunities to make something happen. Raleigh is the GOAT. Bet your house. Yeah, I still don't know what to make of Raleigh Romero. I don't even know if he really thinks he's as good as he is. Like maybe it is probably because I've seen him talk a lot more than I've seen him fight. And when I've seen him fight, I've seen a mix of looking good and not looking so good.